To the passing of Pope Francis. We now know the Pope's funeral will be on Saturday. We have a live look for you this morning at Vatican City, where they've made that announcement around 4 this morning. And of course, you could see you have tourists there, possibly some mourners looking to pay their respects as the Pope will lie in state over the next many days there. Of course, that funeral we know will happen on day 5 following his death. Of course, we were telling you within the first 9 days is when that conclave, and then of course the funeral services will have to happen as written in the traditions right after the Pope's death. Well, as the world mourns the Pope's death, services were held worldwide last night. Take a look at the San Isidro Cathedral. This is in Buenos Aires, as it's one of the country's most Catholic counties. Our producer, Bautista's family, actually sent us this video from that service. And this morning, we now know the Pope died after suffering a stroke, which led to a heart failure. His death comes after he spent more than a month in the hospital for pneumonia. West Michigan Catholics also mourning his loss this morning.
It's definitely not something you expect to wake up to every day, but I think with his extended hospitalization from the last several weeks and the recovery, we kind of went through a little bit of this. I think I can even just recall when he was hospitalized giving an interview like this and kind of processing at that time. So I think it's less of a shock than maybe it normally would be. But I think it's a lot the same. It's very similar as it was for the faithful of Grand Rapids. You know, the Pope is, in one sense, he's far away from us, both in terms of distance, but also just our lives and his. They don't really intersect. You know, the people and the concerns and the cares that the people of Grand Rapids have, the Catholics of Grand Rapids have, their cares and concerns. And yet at the same time, there is a closeness there, and it is a little bit like the loss of a spiritual father, at least. You know, he's this figure who provides this source. He's a source of unity for us as Catholics, and with him gone, there is a kind of mourning as if for a parent, I think. Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts to make it out for the Easter celebration yesterday, and he was able to, say prayers with everyone and kind of connect with them?
I thought that was such a powerful example, and not just yesterday, but even there's the story of when he was sort of in his slacks, and I think he had the scarf on, and he was being pushed by one of his nurses, and he just sort of, even the people, the officials in St. Peter's didn't expect him, and he just sort of popped in and showed up, and he kind of did that periodically over the course of several days. And I just think that speaks to his personality and his approach to his ministry, to the ministry as Pope. Being with the people, that was an important thing, and even if he wasn't sort of functioning as in an official capacity, but just that ministry of presence, it was important for people to see their Papa, and I think that just speaks to his approach and the way he went about his ministry.
It still had to be a bigger shock, though, because he was on. We were preparing for his death, and all of a sudden he got better. It seemed like he was released to the hospital. He made his appearance yesterday, for Easter Sunday Mass, and he had been around and about. So it made it more difficult because people thought he was back on the amends.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's still, as I say, excuse me, there's still that shock. There's still, you wake up and Pope Francis isn't here with us anymore, and that's always going to be a shock. But I think, and again, I just wonder, we sort of made these preparations kind of internally, that we knew, he's 88 years old. He had a slew of health concerns, and so, but at the same time, yeah, you're right. I mean, it's still, you don't expect to wake up and the Pope is gone, and that's always going to be, I think, in a sense, I'm still processing myself. I wake up and I go about my day as I always would, and yet, my father, my lodestar, in a sense, is gone. And I think a lot of people feel that. I think a lot of people are experiencing that.
I'd really love to leave behind. This is a Pope that has done a lot of historical things for Catholicism that they have never seen before. Are there any big takeaways that you have about him?
I think that, as I mentioned before, his approach to his ministry, he really saw himself as a pastor. And that is one of the most important, if not the most important role that he plays as pastor of the Universal Church. And he took that very seriously. And everybody, every pope in history has put their own personal, it's not as if it's a cookie cutter, every pope is the same. Pope John Paul II is very different from Pope Benedict, who's very different from Pope Francis, and yet there's a consistency, through this perspective, there's this grace that God gives these men who are called to shepherd us, and the way he does that just by his his focus on the poor and the marginalized, and the recognition that he is a pope for everyone, but not just the elite, not just the rank and file, but he ministers to all people. And the way in which, even just in the few hours really since the news has broken, we've seen the way that not just the Catholic world has reacted, but we see that there's still a relevance. The Pope is still a relevant figure, and I think with Pope Francis in particular, he made himself relevant by just the way he approached the joy with which he ministered. I think that speaks to, and just the world's reaction speaks to his legacy. His legacy will always be associated with just the way in which he felt called to serve the poorest of the poor, the marginalized, the vulnerable. He felt called to point out the fact that we don't just live on this earth. There's also a kind of symbiotic relationship. All of the ways in which we sort of associate the things we associate with Pope Francis. I think his legacy is going to be unpacked for years, maybe decades.
Well, others in West Michigan reflecting on their meeting with the Pope, including a family who was blessed by Pope Francis. Listen.
That means. Tell us a little bit about your son, first of all. Who is he?
Yeah, so
Just
my son is Xavier Corcoran, and he's 10 years old now. He's in 4th grade. He goes here at St. Thomas the Apostle. He's a student here at St. Thomas. And the first 3 years of his life, we lived in Spain. So the first year, when he was about a year old, we lived on an island called Majorca. That's off the coast of Spain. And while we were living there, my mother-in-law came to visit us. And it was the 1-year anniversary of her becoming Catholic and entering the church. So my wife wanted to take her to Rome to celebrate the 1-year anniversary of her becoming Catholic and entering the church. What a great way to celebrate, by seeing the Vatican. And there was a chance that they might see the Pope too. So she took my son, who was just under a year old at the time, Xavier, and her mom. My wife took them, and they were staying in Rome. They were there for 4 or 5 days, and they went to this audience where the Pope was taking his Pope-mobile around the Vatican Square. And as he's going around, he stops and he'll, shake hands or kiss babies or whatever. So we had prayed before my wife left, like, Lord, we know there's going to be a chance that our son might get kissed by the Pope. So we prayed, like, Lord, if it's your will, let it be done. And she went, and as she was there, the Pope was coming around, and you can see it on YouTube. There's a YouTube video if you search, like, April 15th, 2015, April 15th, 2015, at the 6-minute, 20-second mark. She's holding my son out over the rail, and Pope Francis is driving past, and the Pope knocks on the roof of the car in front of him, and the driver stops, and he points to my son. The guards who are there come over and take my son and hold him up to Pope Francis. Pope Francis kissed him on the head, rubbed his head, and then took him back to his mom, and then he made eye contact with my wife and waved to her. And she said at that moment her legs turned to jello just to see the Pope so close and like making a personal connection with her. Now I had stayed in Majorca, and I knew that all of these audiences were live streamed. So I came back home from work, and I hadn't talked to her or anything, and I was watching the live stream video, and going into it, he's almost all the way around the square, and I'm like, okay, well, it's not happening. Also, I thought I had seen my wife already. Like, I thought they passed. So I thought, oh, this isn't going to happen. And then I see it. He stops. I'm by myself in my apartment, like losing my mind, freaking out with excitement. And he stops and, kisses my son. And I was so moved. It was such a personal encounter for me, for my family. We have a picture, we have lots of pictures of the event. All of the grandparents have this picture in their house. My grandma, his great grandma, has a picture when you first walk in the house of him being kissed by the Pope. So it was really a special moment for our family, but also for our friends as well. So many people after that moment were just like, it made people, just the Pope's presence had the power to make people reflect on the gospel, reflect on who Jesus was, reflect on Christ. And so it was a very powerful moment for all of us. That still, obviously, here we are 10 years later, still talking about it. So it was a very powerful moment for all of us, and lives on to this day. And that I've always felt this special connection to Pope Francis because of that event, because of that gift that he gave me and he gave my family and gave my son with that blessing.
For people outside the faith, just like by both impact and definition, what does it mean to be blessed by the Pope?
Sure. So, like, theologically speaking, the definition, the Pope's role is the vicar of Christ, and the vicar is like the assistant. So as Catholics, we see the Pope as like the right-hand man to Christ and his representative here on earth, and that goes back to St. Peter. So St. Peter was, in Scripture, appointed by Christ as the rock and the leader of the church, and we see that in the Gospels, and we see it lived out in the book of Acts. And that legacy has lived on for the last 2,000 years. So we see Pope Francis as a continuation of that role that Christ gave to Peter, that role has been passed down from pope to pope to pope for generations. So he represents Christ, and he represents the church, which, the church has billions of members, and that role has such an impact on so many people's life as the representation of the church and the leader for the church. So to get blessed by the Pope, to get blessed by a priest is a very special thing. There's special times, like when a priest is first ordained, the first blessings they give, that's like a special moment for Catholics to receive the first blessings of a priest. But then to get blessed by the person who has been elected to be the representative of Christ has a weight and a special feel to it, and there's a uniqueness about it too, because he's the only one, right? He's the only one that's able to give that papal blessing. Mm-hmm. So you can get papal blessings sent to you, documents showing that you've gotten a papal blessing. He sometimes gives his hat to people. That's a special thing too. The Pope shows his affection for people. But it's just as a vicar of Christ, getting a blessing from him is really special.
There is more on the life and legacy of Pope Francis right here on 13 Plus in the news now. Remembering Pope Francis looks back at his 12 years serving as Pope. It includes when he approved of priests blessing same-sex couples, his trip to the United States in 2015, and of course much more. You can watch the special pinned right now at the bottom of your screen.